Welcome, new and old friends. I just have a couple things to say, and then the stories will begin. Before you drift off into the dream realm, please remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment. If you'd like to find out about my social links, my website, how to help the channel, check the description box. Now turn off your lights, make sure your doors and windows are locked. It's time to dream. Notepad for Jenny, Babysitting, by eetobaggadix. Hi Jenny, thanks again for dog sitting for us. $350 per day as agreed will be paid to you when we come back in 3 days. That's a lot of money, kiddo. Please read through all the pages of this notepad. Just go ahead and keep it with you in case you're worried about forgetting any of the rules. No pressure or anything. Pickles and Kilroy are pretty easy to take care of. They're real sweethearts. The dog's food is in the bottom cabinet next to the pantry. Fill it every morning and every night. As for the water, make sure to fill it up with a filter and give them the water from the filter, not just directly from the sink. Something about the unfiltered city water makes them sick, and no one wants a sick dog. What a mess. Take them both for walks every morning and every afternoon. They'll get antsy with us gone and chew up the furniture. What a mess. Don't worry about the catfish in the fish tank. When Kilroy gets excited, he might jump on you. Personally, I think it's sweet, but if you want him off you, you just have to toss a toy and play catch for a while. Just don't open the door for anyone who knocks, okay? We live in a nice neighborhood, but if it's really important, they can come back. Kilroy likes to play catch inside, and Pickle likes to play catch outside. Go figure. Make sure you wash Pickles off with a hose if she gets too dirty. She likes to play in the water, just don't let her track any of the mud inside. What a mess. If the fish tank springs a leak, what a mess. Don't worry about it, we'll clean it up when we get back. It might smell bad and the floor will be wet, but that's it, okay? It's not a big deal. Just don't worry about it. Please ignore the catfish. Go ahead and leave the TV on all the time, the one in the living room. Mute if you have to. All the pets like it. There's a video game in my son's bedroom. Do not override his save files, for goodness sake. Just play on your own new game or whatever. But if you see the fish tank in his room instead of the living room, just turn out the lights and close the door. If Pickles or Kilroy are in the bedroom with you and the fish tank, you'll be okay. But they're rowdy, free-roaming dogs and might leave you alone in there, and no one wants that. What a mess. I think that about covers it. Thanks again, Jenny. Keep an eye on our dogs, and don't be afraid to let them keep an eye on you. I may be gone, but know that we'll meet again in heaven one day. And on that day, I shall rise from the bowels of fury perdition and appear as a serpent with 7 heads to slay your angels, strike you down from your throne, and begot a son to rule on earth as I shall in heaven for all of eternity. A Hearty Betrayal by Substantial Bite 788. The restaurant was nice. First time eating there. Nothing spectacular, but nor was it disgusting. The movie was funny. I'll watch it again. The night went well, except I felt alone. My wife wasn't talking much. She never initiated any conversation. Only responded with yes or no and sometimes maybe. Nothing much beyond that. Are you alright? Yes. You sure? Yep. On the drive home, the acid in my stomach began to boil up into my throat. I'm going to stop at the store and get some antacid. No answer. Walking up to the store, I looked back at my wife. She looked somber, irate, elderly, a statue gazing out into nowhere. The gray in her hair was accentuated by the red neon sign hanging in the store window. I went inside and found some antacids and lemon-lime soda. I swiped my card, not noticing the clerk. I was focused on my wife. She had been unhappy for a while now. Need a receipt? Hey, do you need a receipt? No, I hesitated, thinking that I had never asked if she wanted anything. I exited the store and stepped over the concrete parking block. A skinny, tall man wearing a gray hooded vinyl jacket was standing next to the car talking to my wife. I couldn't see his face. His head was down and he had a hood pulled down over his eyes. I could hear his deep voice and my wife's jovial laughter. I grabbed the door latch in anger and jerked it upwards. My hand slipped off and I tumbled backwards. I'm sorry, I locked the door, my wife called out. Her voice was distant and muffled. She leaned over and locked the door and pushed it open. The man dashed away. Who the fuck was that? Nobody. Calm down. He was just trying to borrow some money. She was smiling, a far different person than before I went into the store. She radiated happiness, a certain kind of bliss I had never seen in her face. Did you get me anything? No, sorry. What do you want? I'll go back in and get it. No, I'm fine. I just want to go home. No, I mean it. What do you want? Nothing. I just want to go home. Please, Stan. It's all good. I'm sorry I've been gloomy tonight. I'm just tired. We passed into the last traffic light before our subdivision. You just ran a red light. What were you laughing at with that guy? She laughed. He was just... She paused. Silly. Silly? Well, I'm glad someone can make you happy tonight. There was not much more conversation that night. There was an unsettled anger between us, a silent understanding that only marriage couples understand. We got undressed, laid in bed, far away from one another, watched a little television, and fell asleep. In the middle of the night, my throat started burning. I was regurgitating fire and sulfur. I went downstairs to the kitchen. Antacid wasn't going to quell this madness. I needed something stronger. I filled my glass with some tap water, shoved out 2 spoonfuls of baking soda, stirred, and drank the vile concoction down as fast as I could. My stomach seized up in agony. I was in so much pain that I couldn't move. All I could do was stand there bent over. Any attempts to stand up straight would cause more cramping and excruciating muscle spasms. There was an intense pain for more than a minute, and then a swelling of instant relief as I belched out the pressure that was rolling around in my abdomen. There is nothing more soothing than the juxtaposition of immediate relief that comes after prolonged acute pain. I stumbled back upstairs, feeling relaxed, my stomach warm and calm. As I pulled the covers up to get back to sleep, I happened to glance at our bedroom window. There in the backyard, it looked like a hole had been dug out. I couldn't make out the length or the width. I just saw an amorphous black void, a space where nothing existed. My wife was snoring, belling out long draws of incoherent dream talk. Middle of the night is always right. He loves me. I got dressed, went to the basement, grabbed a flashlight and a tire iron. It was a frigid night, and my hand was shaking, casting the stream of light about in an erratic motion, never catching upon the object of my concern, the hole. When I finally got to the hole, I could see that it was rectangular in shape, the length of a full-grown man and about 6 feet deep. Someone had dug a grave in my backyard. Behind me, I heard a shuffling. I turned, but before I could put my arms up in defense, something steely pounded me across the forehead. I lost my balance and fell into the grave, my flashlight entire and still in hand. A ray of light flashed across the silhouette of my assailant. It was the man in the gray hooded jacket. Blood was streaming down my temples and into my ears. It was steady, warm flow. My head was throbbing, my sight blurred. I tried to roll over to my side. My body was constricted by the narrow walls of my earthen abode. My arms were weak and frail. Every move I made took an immense amount of energy. Dirt was slung onto my face. I could hear a shovel pitched into a loose mound of dirt. I was being buried alive. I screamed out for help. I saw a flash of light from above. My wife had heard me. She had turned on the bathroom light. The shoveling stopped. I heard the men scramble to the back door. "Stan, are you out there?" "Yes, help me," I uttered in despair, not thinking of the danger I was causing upon my wife. "Hold on, I'll be right down." "No, call the police." I heard the back door open, but I didn't hear the expected shriek of fear and the maddening cry for help. "Well, now we can be together," I heard her say. "Do you want me to kill him first?" "In a minute, darling. But first, I need you to come inside." I felt my heart implode. I was desolate and ready to die. A light, misty rain began to fall. It was soft and soothing, a dangerous lull. Time and misery had allowed the mist to turn the dirt into inescapable mud. When I finally found a resolve to try and climb out of the grave, it was to no use. With every grasp of earth came the tumbling down of more fill for my burial. I felt around for anything, a root or a rock, something I could firmly clutch in my hands. But there was nothing. I could yell, but it would be no good. We lived in a rural area, miles away from civilization. Our nearest neighbor was a mile away on either side. I collapsed down onto the ground and waited. My only chance was to hurl my tire iron at the man, hoping like hell I hit him square in the head. If so, then maybe we'd fall into the grave. I would beat him to death and use his body as a ladder, and then I would find my wife. Oh, I would find my wife. The thoughts I had are too terrible even to write down. The rain became a deluge, tiny muddy waterfalls coming cascading down the sides. I had been buried in a froth of penitential misery. Man had dug the grave, but God was burying me. I heard a scream, a high-pitched shrill. I rejoiced. Her plan had gone awry. She was getting what she deserved. He may get away, but at least she wouldn't. I heard the back door open. The rain ceased. The last act was upon me. The curtain was being drawn. Something was being dragged across the ground. There was a grunt, and then a body slung into the hole. The dead weight fell stiff against my outstretched legs, its right arm forced across its naked back by the side wall of the grave, and its head buried in the water. I pointed my flashlight at the body. At that point, a gray hooded vinyl jacket was also tossed in the grave. I rolled the body over. It was the man with a caved-in chest where his heart should have been. I heard some clanging. A ladder was lowered down into the grave. "Come on out of there, honey." I pointed my flashlight upwards. My wife was standing next to the ladder. She looked younger, just as beautiful as the day I had met her in high school. The gray in her hair was gone. She smiled. Her teeth were stained with blood. "Don't worry about him. I'll finish up here." I climbed up the ladder, uncertain of my fate. When I got to the top, she came to me and put her arms around my waist and pulled me into a forceful embrace. "I love you so much. I hope this doesn't change anything between us. I'll explain it in time. It's only every 20 years. Later that night, she came to bed and snuggled up beside me. She dozed off and began talking in her sleep. Before, I had never paid attention to what she said, but now I heard everything. I hear the cruelty and the malevolence with which she had existed. She confesses to me her sins, and I absolve her of any wrongdoing, partly out of pity, but mostly out of fear. Especially the fear of what may happen in 20 years. My childhood sweetheart and I made a vow that if in 20 years, if we were both still single, we'd find each other again and be together no matter what. If she slumps in the chair now, it's only 'cause her spine sort of dislodged when I was digging her up. I pulled something weird out of my belly button by SpikeHayes. I'm kind of freaking out after this morning with the blood and all, but let me explain the last few days first. I've always had a little piece of dead gray skin in my belly button, like a fish scale or something. I'm an innie, by the way, as we called them as kids, versus an outie. Like some kind of abominable cyclops staring out at everyone during shirtless summer days. I always wanted the outie. Anyway, I've had it my entire life, like a piece of belly button lint that fossilized along the way. I assumed it was part of the umbilical cord and stayed attached, withered, and dried. I tried a few times to lodge it because of my obsessive nature, picking at it with a pinky nail or swabbing it away with a Q-tip. This wasn't daily or anything, just whenever I happened to remember to wash it in the shower or notice the extra flab surrounding it. A bit more of that lately, which is why I've been dwelling on it more. Too much comfort eating, I guess. The day before yesterday, I was obsessed over it more than usual, to the point my belly button and surrounding skin was pink from scratching. I went into the bathroom of my apartment, took out tweezers from the medicine cabinet, and set out to do some excavating. I am super careful and kept picturing someone bumping into me with the door and me jamming the tweezers into my gut. I live alone, by the way. The tip of the 2 stainless steel tweezer prongs gently pinched together on the gray flake. I squeezed a little harder to see if any nerves were connected, but felt nothing. I gave a gentle tug, again fearing a sharp pain that never came. The piece of dried skin didn't move. I pulled harder, pinching tighter, but kept everything controlled. It felt like my entire belly button was being pulled outward, so I started wiggling the tweezers back and forth in an attempt to dislodge it. That worked. It slowly pulled up into the side, and then to the other side, and then a slight pop movement came free. Something apparently tore because there was a pinch of pain and a small sprinkle of blood. I winched and quickly dabbed it with a tissue. That did the trick. I can't explain the mad feeling of gratification that pulsed through me. Like leveling up after an impossible boss battle, or popping that Mount Vesuvius on your forehead. Only 1,000,000 times better. The elated feeling only lasted a second, though, until I looked at what was caught in the tweezer. It had hair. I peered closer and swear there was a little whitish bits, like grains of sand, in an upper and lower row and 2 slits above those. The hair was bristly, individual barbs that stuck out in a single strip along the top. I shivered. For whatever reason, I wanted to keep it, like a patient keeps their kidney stone. It had been with me, a part of me, for so many years. Dumb, I know. Lame, even more so. I dropped it in a small mason jar and set it on the shelf in the living room. I don't have any trophies or medals for sports to display because I sucked. But this felt like a victory. Years of battle trying to dig this thing out, and I finally did. For the rest of the day, I couldn't help but admire my handiwork every time I walked past the shelf to go to the kitchen. Mr. Umbinical. He even looked like he had a little scrubbed-up face with a punk rock hairdo. Yes, I realize I need to get a life, but remote work, you know. At first, you feel lonely, even with a work chat pinging away, and then the outside world starts to feel like a dream, grocery shopping like a field trip. And then it's not that bad. So don't judge too hard. At least it wasn't a sex doll. Yesterday morning was rough. Town hall meeting on Zoom, and they made us be on camera. The worst. I took on the zombie death stare at my computer monitor, afraid to look at the camera lens and watch all my coworkers and the executives in their little talking head boxes. I can't tell you what they discussed. After it was over, I head to the kitchen. Another cup of coffee was definitely an order after that. I glanced at Mr. Umbilical and stopped, leaning closely to look through the mason jar glass. I swayed back and forth to see if it was a trick of the glass, a distortion, but it held. The punky hair, 2 rows of white teeth, and 2 little beads above them, black as oil. Right where the slits had been. What the frick? I said out loud, staring hard at the jar without blinking. Mr. Umbilical stared right back, a blinking contest from hell. I straightened and walked to the kitchen, keeping my head turned and eyes on the jar until I was at the counter. I definitely need to get out more, I thought. The coffee poured streamed into my "today is a Control-Alt-Delete kind of day" mug. I walked back to the shelf and looked at the thing with eyes in the mason jar. I knew they weren't really eyes, and it probably wasn't even an umbilical cord. More likely accumulation of junk that started forming when I was a kid and didn't know the metrics of good hygiene. Damn, that coffee tastes good. It got me through the rest of the morning, and the energy drink helped me finish off the day. When I woke up this morning, the craving for coffee was gone, which was weird because that's usually the first thought I have, my coffee fix, followed by thinking of today's the day I finally give notice at this job. I felt a sharp twinge of pain when I sat up in bed and looked down at the white sheets swirled around my torso. They had red on them. I yanked the sheets back and stared down at my belly button, rivets of blood trickling out the hole and a red smearing around it. I must have torn it worse than I thought. I went cold, but not because of the blood. The health insurance for my job was a joke, and I definitely couldn't afford an emergency room visit. I ran to the bathroom, jostling various bottles on the sink, and pulled out the hydrogen peroxide. I sat on the toilet seat, leaned back so my belly button was almost horizontal, and I poured the peroxide into it. Holy hell, did that burn and fizz up. I let it soak a minute and then mopped it up with a wad of toilet paper. What a relief. No more blood. I couldn't see any obvious damage inside, and the prickling pain had stopped. I leaned back against the toilet tank and let out a deep sigh. At least it was Saturday. Once the drama was over, my foggy brain bullhorned that we hadn't had coffee yet, and I could already feel a caffeine-deprived headache coming on. I finished in the bathroom, got dressed, and walked through the living room. I glanced at the shelf, middle finger fully deployed, and frowned. The mason jar was empty. If you press the button, you will instantly receive 50k, but a random side effect will activate throughout the entire universe. 50k has been paid into your account, and water now has an expiration date. There's something wrong with the new house I just bought. By C. Resolution 2062. See, I just moved out of my parents' home at the whopping age of 29. I've been saving up my money since I got a job at 19. I never went to college either. Since I never went to college, I have a pretty cheap paying job. It's better than minimum wage, but not 50k a year better. The house I recently bought is small, which is fine considering it's just me living there. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom connected to the bedroom, a kitchen, a dining room, and a living room. Now, the problem started last week. I was trying to finish setting up my kitchen when the toaster popped open. That was very odd considering I wasn't toasting anything or even messing with the toaster at all. But the toaster came with the house, so I figured it must be broken and that's why they left it. I didn't face another problem until 2 weeks later. I was face down in my bed, 9 o'clock at night, and I had just gotten home. I was half asleep when I heard it. The shower had turned on. I could hear the water running and it draining slowly. I managed to force myself up in the half-asleep, half-awake place I was in. But as soon as I reached the bathroom door, the water stopped. What the hell? I said out loud, half expecting someone or something from the inside bathroom to reply back. Nothing did. The bathroom door was shut. I was standing directly in front of it. I was almost too scared to open it. And then I reminded myself that I was a grown-ass man. I wasn't a pussy, and I wasn't scared. I grabbed the knob, twisted it, and flung the bathroom door open as fast as I could. Nothing. Nothing was there. I'll be honest, I almost fell to the ground from the relief that overflowed me. I was expecting to see some growling on all fours monster staring at me. Thankfully, I didn't, and I know I shouldn't have, but I brushed it off as nothing, and I really shouldn't have. Small things have been happening ever since. Nothing major. Nothing enough to scare me so bad I moved in with my parents. Just doors I thought shut being open, and lights I could have sworn I turned off being on. It was almost a month later before something big happened. It scared me so bad I almost packed my shit and left. And now, looking back, I should have. It was midnight, Saturday, my night off. Since it was my night off, I was staying up late playing on my phone. I sleep with all the lights in the house off, mostly to keep the electrical bill down. It just so happened to look down at the bathroom door. It was shut, but I could see yellow through the crack at the bottom of the door, meaning that light that I previously turned off was now on. I was honestly going to just leave it, but I kept thinking about it, and it just kept bothering me. So I got up to turn the light off. As soon as I opened the bathroom door, the light turned off. Click. My bedroom light flicked on. This wasn't even what really scared me, but a few seconds later, I heard a crashing noise from down the hall. It sounded like it was either coming from the kitchen or dining room. I started my way down the hall, and I'll be honest, very slowly, as if something would jump out at me at any second. I made my way to the dining room, where the lamp had been on the table previously, but now was a disaster on the floor. Glass was everywhere. I got a broom and a dustpan to clean it up. Most of the glass was in the dustpan. I went into the kitchen where the trash was so that I could dump the glass in it. I stepped on the thing on the bottom of the trash can that makes it shoot open. And just as I did, I saw with my own eyes my cabinet door fly open, and then just a moment later, my flower being knocked out of it. Now, also a disaster on the floor. I almost shit my pants right there and then. I dropped the dustpan full of glass and hurled my way to my room. I slammed the door shut and locked it. Then, my grown-ass self jumped on the bed and under the covers. I didn't move until I saw a light from the rising sun shine through my curtains. I decided to put cameras up. I don't know why. It's not like there was a person causing all of this, obviously. I honestly just wanted to see if stuff happened while I was at work too, or just while I was at home. All the stuff that happened always occurred at nighttime. I'm writing this from my bedroom. It's 3 o'clock in the day, and it, whatever it is, has become bold. It no longer cares whether or not it's night. It doesn't hide in the dark anymore. God, I wish it did. A few minutes before writing this, I checked my cameras. They show live footage, and you can also rewind and watch old footage. I was watching old footage from yesterday night when I was at work. Doors would open and close by themselves, same for the kitchen cabinets. Lights would flicker, and every so often, I swear I could see a black shadow. While watching, I heard a noise I hadn't heard before. It wasn't a crash or a loud boom. It was more like a humming noise. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It sounded close but far away at the same time. I checked the cameras in the dining room. Nothing. The kitchen next. Again. The cameras picked up nothing usual. Wait. Hold on. What was that? In the far left corner. It was a black shadow, except it wasn't. It was way clearer than that. I could see the details, like there was eyes looking like it had seen something you could never come back from. Or the way its mouth was curled up into a smile, but not a nice smile you see neighbors you don't really like. A sinister, cruel smile. It didn't match its eyes. Whatever this thing was, it shouldn't be smiling. It seemed to teleport from the kitchen to the dining room, back to the kitchen, and repeat. It was in the kitchen when it teleported again, except this time it wasn't in the dining room. It teleported to the bathroom, which is connected to my bedroom. And that's when I noticed my camera wasn't on live feed. The footage I was watching already happened. I quickly changed it to the live feed, and it was no longer in the bathroom. I quickly snapped my head to look at all 4 corners of my room. Nothing. I switched the camera to my room just in case. I wish I hadn't. Underneath my bed, under me, where my feet were hanging off, was a head sticking out. Those same eyes, and I swear that smile had gotten bigger. And I realized where the humming sound had been coming from all this time. As the villagers piled wood around the poor woman bound at the stake, one man cried out, "If she truly be a bride of Satan, why does she not use her witchery to overwhelm us?" As nervous murmurs of debate spread through the crowd, the convicted woman quietly said, "Oh, I was just waiting until you were all in one place." Is It in the Corner of Your Eye? By No Conception 7327. You saw something, didn't you? You couldn't make out what it was, but it was in the corner of your eye. Follow these rules to survive. Number 1. Do not ignore it. The more you ignore it, the more it moves away from the corner to the center of your vision. Number 2, look at its direction immediately. The longer you take, the closer it gets. Number 3, avoid blinking when you see it. Blinking will increase the time it takes for you to look in its direction. Number 4, do not rub your eyes. It's a trick to make you take longer to look at it. If your eye itches, take it as a sign that it's going to appear in a corner soon. Number 5, it doesn't matter when you start seeing it. It will go away at midnight. Number 6, after you survived it, report it to us on our helpline or our office when we're open. We'll take care of it. Number 7, if it reaches the center of your vision, we're sorry. The UDA. There's a rumor going around that our steam buns are filled with cat meat, which is just plain silly if you think about it. Why go through the trouble of chasing down something as agile as a cat when children are much easier to catch and taste so much better? Ways of the Isle by Verrgasm. Upon our vessel's arrival on the shores of far-flung Isle of Shejna, we were greeted by nothing but a desolate stretch of bone-white sand reaching as far as the eye could see in either direction. There were no warm welcomes uttered by parties of kind and lighted natives as I had expected and dearly hoped for. No crustaceans crawling its barren surface, and no birds flew overhead. Even the wind, which had so violently shook us to the point of near disaster not but an hour before, refused to make its presence known. I signaled to the small crew that this was perfectly typical in such an obscure land, but in truth my mouth lay agape just as theirs was, although I did a decent enough job of hiding it from them. The previous investigations, spanning those last 4 excruciating years, had finally led me there, to the hidden Shizna Islands, accessible only through an extremely precise, treacherous, and laborious route, nestled deep in the treacherous bowels of the North Atlantic, traversable only during the most unforgiving of storms. After failed voyages, squandering most of my inheritance and several good seamen's lives, nearly perishing more than once myself as a result, I was ecstatic to have finally reached what I wished so dearly to be those fabled lands thought in legend to contain people who are said to have transcended death itself. And yet, our immediate surroundings inspire little but dread within me. I assumed defeating death would produce a lush landscape of thriving life, existing blissfully and in perfect natural harmony. However, all we could see for miles and endless miles inland was naught but a wasteland of scraggly brownish-yellow grass and a scant grouping of leafless, jagged trees beneath a gloomy sky. The land itself seemed to go onwards towards infinity, stretching into a vast, misty steppe with no visible end in sight. I hoped with all my heart that I had not once again been mistaken in my calculations, as another failure would surely have left me all but desolate once I found myself back on familiar, civilized soil. I beckoned the whaley sailors forth after helping to gather supplies for the journey, of which I had no idea how long it may take, and we all lugged what we could onto a nondescript swathe of nothing grass before us. It crumbled beneath our boot heels, disintegrating into ash. As such, markers that would lead us back to our ship proved entirely unnecessary, and a portion of our firewood load was abandoned along the way due to the evenness of the still temperature climate. The footsteps we left behind, scorched black as if our souls were ablaze, proving to be all the more distinguishable even from a distance. The land's unpredicted peculiarities disturbed me. I knew I mustn't let the others know how truly out of depth I really was, lest they lose faith in my expertise and turn mutinous. They were here, somewhere, and we would find them, learn their secrets, that the whole world might benefit from such great knowledge. Oh, how naive I was. We walked for an incalculable long stretch of time, each man leaving his trail of jet-black boot prints behind him, burned into the death beneath. The air waved and sparked on the peripherals of my vision, sending me into an anxious spiral of self-doubt. Indeed, this place was clearly at least preternatural, its lifeless composition chomping at the nerves and making one sick with a desperate urge to flee. An urge, it was clear, which affected each of us present. Flee, however, we did not. We pushed onwards as a group, and while no real words were exchanged for the moment we stepped foot on the shore, it was as if each man knew, all to himself, of the significance of this endeavor, that we were on the cusp of something previously seen by very few before us. To my sudden delight, I spotted a rather striking swab of vibrant purple cresting a hill on the otherwise flat landscape. My words failed to bring themselves to fruition, falling into nothingness beyond my lips, and yet my intent translated through some other unknown means, and the crew's attention was drawn collectively towards the object of my pointing finger. The others apparently couldn't speak either, but as if of one mind, we changed course and headed towards the small hill. Still living flowers akin to strange alien bluebells were the source of the color, the only such splash apparently left in all the land, and I implored the men wordlessly not to touch them. None did, struck with a sort of reverence that one feels when face to face with the only modicum of thriving life in a sea of decay. Pacing ever so carefully through the flowers underfoot, urging the group to stay at the bottom so not to disturb the flora more than need be, I climbed the hill, taking all of a minute. At the top, I felt higher than God himself. I saw my effort repaid tenfold before my eyes. The natives, the legendary Shintaki people, sat at least 100 in number in neat, awaiting rows staring me dead from down below. All of similar basic height and complexion, and garbed in identical flower brown robes, all fixed with some stock, emotionless expression. Behind them lay their surprisingly crude settlement, wooden shacks adorned with a massive large arrangement of concentric circles constructed using black and white rocks. The design inherently primitive, but the scene emitted a strange but very clear power just the same, as if the building served not only as living space, but as part of some grand occult display as well. I could tell these people were also completely wordless, as we had been, as is the case for all creatures which inhabit the silent lands of Shizna. However, their minds were abuzz in communication, an ethereal line of shared thoughts in which I had momentarily breached, as I stared paralyzed, looking over at the masked, stone-faced countenance of the locals. The return look, suddenly becoming a furious glare, Let me know where I stood in their eye at that moment. We were invaders and would be treated as such. We were all quite unable to move until compelled to submit to the will of the Shintak. I watched on from the hilltop as the crew were each led to and then bound amongst the center of those circles, of which were likely to be visible from the edge of space in their grand scale. And each man seemed to them merge with the rocks, becoming translucent and monstrously indistinguishable from their former natural appearance. They outwardly seemed almost unaware of the change, as if already dead, and yet they were so clearly and justly suffering. The thoughts of the Shintak becoming unpenetrable beyond a collective din of reveille as I looked upon my fallen friends. I could hear their manic cries of terror rip silently through the windless landscape as their congealed forms began to radiate a pulsing purple luster from within. I might have stood there for centuries, or maybe just an hour or two, but when it was finally all over and the men on the rocks were no longer men, and their transformation was complete, sucked into the land eternally, I was summoned to the bottom of the hill. The Shintak joined me there, lined in their strange formations, where in one voice I was thanked for presenting such a bountiful harvest to the immortal kin of the Shinnaz. They offered me what I was in search of, their power, to use as my own, but with a dreadful condition. It was one which I shamefully and remorsefully took up within a second thought. Over 50 years have passed since my return home. I have traveled extensively by boat and rail. My preaching has accumulated a party of followers thrice the size of my former crew, all clamoring to obtain a face as ageless as mine. Enlisting their combined wealth, a new ship awaits us on the dock, upon which we shall set sail once more for the fabled Shinnaz steppe. There is a little guilt remaining in my soul, if such a thing remains within me after what I have become, although, at the end of it all, who could possibly say no to forever? When my wife discovered the school bags in our basement, I had to tell her what really happened to the missing children of our town. They're actually very nice, my wife said as she checked the school bags that I had crafted from the skin of those children. Welcome to the facility by Mr. Potato II. Hey there, if you're reading this, you're probably on tour of our facility. Welcome. Our project is to secure, contain, and protect, as you will learn in this awesome experience. Before you start the tour, though, there are some important rules to acknowledge and learn. 1. Do not be afraid to ask questions. This tour, above all, is meant to educate and encourage learning, and our tour guide will be happy to answer any questions about our project. 2. Entering the facility is at one's own risk, and the Foundation will not take any liability for any incident of body or psychological harm to the individual, including injuries, deterioration of mental health, and death. 3. The Foundation reserves the right to use any means necessary to prevent containment breaches, including harming the individual. 4. If any of the rules lack proper punctuation, have bad grammar, or seem misplaced, do not trust them. Multiple SCPs have the ability to edit documents, and a few of them want you well. 5. Never stray away from the tour group. The facility is secure, and we will not ensure personal safety when leaving the tour group without permission. When needing to go to the bathroom or other similar situations, always ask permission from your group's tour guide and tag along with a guard. The facility is not responsible for any situation transpiring by breaking this rule. 6. When visiting SCP-999, the Tickle Monster, be gentle and kind, and do not, under any circumstance, let it ingest caffeine, including cola drinks. Staff do not take kindly to mistreatments of SCP-999. 7. At lunch break, the use of SCP-294, the coffee vending machine, is permitted as long as you follow proper safety protocols. Examples of safety protocols not being followed are inputting a cup of bob or antimatter into the machine. Examples of safety protocols being followed are inputting Fanta or black coffee with 2 sugars. SCP-294 is heavily guarded all the time, and the guards will not take lightly to ignoring safety precautions. 8. At the viewing station, please skip the SCP-096 station. The AI face detector sensor is not currently working. Any visitor ignoring this rule will promptly be shot and killed by the facility guards to prevent a containment breach. 9. Any sightings of SCP-1048, Teddy, and/or its clones, must promptly be reported to the facility guards. Any advances by Teddy, alone or not, are to be ignored, and the most advisable response is to run or otherwise quickly escape the situation. No matter what, do not act threatening towards Teddy or his replicants. Teddy will try to trick you. 10. The Foundation is not liable to harms caused to individuals during containment breaches. 10-1. Should a containment breach occur during the tour, stay with your assigned tour group. Your tour guide always knows best. Do not, under any circumstance, leave the tour group without explicit permission given to you by the tour guide. 10-2. Should you separate from your tour group during the containment breach, follow these steps. 10-2-1. Find an isolated room with a lockable door. Keep the lights off and stay silent. 10-2-2. Never lose your assigned bag. Inside are 3 items: a loaded pistol, an unaliving pill, and a walkie-talkie. 10-2-3. A general rule. If you encounter any anomalous entities during a containment breach, you shoot them 2 times with the pistol. If they budge, shoot them again or run. If they do not budge, either take your pill or aim the pistol at your temple and fire. Trust me, it's better that way. 10-2-4. If the entity looks like an old man or can walk through walls, do not waste any bullets. Instead, off yourself immediately. Dying quickly is infinitely better than your fate he will give you if you resist. 10-2-5. Should you hear the cries of a loved one outside, do not investigate. Your loved ones are not here. They are not in danger. This is most probably SCP-939. 10-2-6. If you hear the voice of your tour guide outside, you've found your group again and you are safe. Exit the room and group up with them. 10-3-7. If you hear any creatures outside, please inform the security guards by using your assigned walkie-talkie. Speak loudly and clearly. 10-2-8. When a containment breach occurs, ceiling lights will turn from white to red. When the colors turn back to white, you are safe. Stay inside your hiding spot until a guard finds you. Correction! Shoot the guard. He is not your friend. The breach is still ongoing. After, take his clearance card. Make your way to cell 17 and open it. It's safe inside. 11. There appears to have been a breach on this document by an unknown SCP. It has bolded out fake rules, but to summarize, do not follow rules. Do not listen to them. The Foundation are not who you think they are. The hospital social worker let me know that there was actually a way for my emergency appendectomy to be done for free. My hand shook a bit when I signed the contract that allowed the team to proceed without anesthesia and live stream the whole thing for profit. True Zombie by Jumble Tumble. It's midnight. I'm alone at home and I can't sleep. So I decide to have a stroll down the street. It's silence, the only sound of wildlife being crickets and other insects chirping together. It was a beautiful night and the sky was clear, and so I decided to stop at the local park. There's a cemetery nearby, yet I'm not bothered until I see it. The moon hung high in the night sky, casting an eerie glow over the desolate yard. A chilling wind whispered through the trees, causing the leaves to rustle in the haunting symphony. It was in this unsettling atmosphere that I found myself frozen in fear, my heart pounding in my chest. Before me stood a mindless corpse, its decaying body swaying slightly in the breeze. Half of its head hung off to the side, revealing a gruesome and gory sight. Its rotting brown blood spilling onto the grass, staining it a deep crimson and causing the worms to wiggle to the surface. The body just stood there, its one remaining eye fixed upon me as if it had no thought but to watch me. The eye, clouded with cataract, seemed to pierce through my soul, sending shivers down my spine. I couldn't tear my gaze away from the grotesque figure standing before me. It was as if time had stopped and the world around me had faded into nothingness. The only thing that existed in that moment was me and the rotting corpse staring at me. I stood there, my mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of this sickening scene. How did this corpse come to be? What sinister forces had brought it to life? Questions swirled in my head, but no answers presented themselves. Fear had grasped my lungs. Every breath was a sharp pain down my throat and in my chest. The wind picked up, carrying with it a putrid stench of decay, the corpse's tattered clothes fluttering in the gusts, revealing more of his decayed flesh. The sight was enough to make bile rise in my throat, but I couldn't look away. It was like watching a lion tear apart a zebra, so grotesque that you want to look away and forget, yet so fascinating you can't look away. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl emitted from the lifeless body. The sound was so disturbing it gave me a headache, freezing me in place and locking my feet to the floor. What was left of the corpse's mouth opened and a sickling gargling escaped its throat. It took a step forward, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its rotting flesh had been holding onto the jaw by a thread before detaching and dropping to the floor. More dark blood flooded and dropped down onto the grass. Panic surged through me, urging me to run to escape this evil, unnatural presence. But my legs refused to move, feeling both solid and like jelly at the same time. The corpse continued its slow, deliberate approach, its one eye fixed upon me. It was like it could see into the depths of my soul, feeding off my terror. With every step it took, you could hear the bones and joints popping and crackling against each other, like a dislocated knee being bent constantly. The air grew thick with an oppressive smell of rot suffocating me. I could feel the weight of evil pressing down upon me, threatening to consume me whole. As the corpse drew closer, I could see its mushy red features in greater detail. Its flesh was molted and rotting, maggots wiggling within the open wounds. The stench of death grew stronger, overpowering my senses. I could taste the metallic tang of blood on my tongue mingling with the vomit rising in my throat. Just as the corpse reached out its decaying hand, a surge of adrenaline coursed through my veins. A primal scream of fear, I broke free from my paralysis and stumbled backwards, tripping over my own feet. I scrambled to my hands and knees, my heart pounding in my ears. I got up and ran as fast as my trembling legs would carry me. Behind me, I could hear the corpse's unearthly crackling steps growing fainter, and the sound of its flesh falling off and dripping onto the concrete fading away. But I dared not look back. I ran until my lungs burned like methyl and my shins were in agonizing pain. Only when I reached the safety of my home did I allow myself to collapse, gasping for breath. That night, as I lay in bed, drenched in a cold sweat, I couldn't shake the image of the mindless corpse from my mind. Its haunting gaze, its decaying form, and the terror it had instilled in me would forever etched into my memory. I knew that I had encountered something beyond the realm of the living, something that would forever haunt my nightmares. It was something sinister, evil, something that shouldn't have ever existed in this mortal realm. To this day, I can smell the flesh, I can hear the joints causing friction against each other, and I can see its blood shimmering in the moonlight, the brown liquid that once was blood stained against its skin. And of course, the way it looked at me with that clouded eye, like a crystal ball reading my demise. As an atheist, I watched as all hell broke loose. 10 seconds before, a voice told everyone that our own religion was the one true religion and we had to defend it. Bedtime Story by OK Programmer 6938. It was a Wednesday, not a significant date by any means, just another Wednesday. That's what I thought anyways, what I thought before everything happened. I live in a nice 2-story home near the beach in a fairly decent neighborhood, but recently there had been a string of kidnappings. Children taken from their beds in the dead of the night. I was drifting in and out of the couch downstairs after a long day of working a physical, demanding job. My son had gone to bed about an hour before, and I was zoning out to the drone of the nightly news. There was a noise upstairs, a soft thump that came just above me. It sounded like my son had fallen out of bed, but the recent reports had made me nervous. I went upstairs and cut into my room, opening the gun safe and pulling out my old Smith & Wesson. I double-checked the drum and quickly drifted towards my son's room. His door was cracked, and I could hear a woman's voice on the other side. Slowly, I pushed the door open to find my wife sitting in bed with my boy. She looked like she had just gotten out of the shower. Her skin shone in the dim light of the moon, like it was still damp, and her hair hung wetly against her head like some sort of inky blanket. She clung tightly to my son as the cold air from his open window sent chills down my spine. My boy sat wide-eyed next to her, both of them fixated on a book. I think I can. she whispered to him as she flipped the page with a free hand. Her eyes slowly drifted to me as more light fled into the room. She smiled softly at me and crooked a finger. "Come, you read the last page," she cooed sweetly. I raised the gun to the woman and drew back the hammer. "I don't know who or what you are, but my wife died 3 years ago," I stated. The thing, pretending to be my wife, shrieked back, its gaze now fixed to me. It dropped to the floor, arms and legs far too long to be human, skidding backwards, drifting to the windowsill where it lingered for several minutes before leaping out. I rushed over to my son and wrapped my arms tightly around him, closing my eyes and breathing a deep sigh. "Nanny," I heard his muffled whimper from my chest. "Yeah, buddy?" I said, pulling away to look into his eyes. "It's still watching us," he whispered. Slowly my gaze turned to the window. It was still there, whatever it was. Its head barely poking above the bottom of the window, watching us, unblinking. Quickly, I grabbed my gun and leveled it to that thing's forehead, but before I could pull the trigger, it had ducked away. I rushed to the window and poked my head out, and there on the ground it stood, staring up at me. The thing had changed. It now only vaguely resembled my wife. 2 long arms and leg thing, whatever the hell it was, blinked, eyelids closing vertically instead of horizontally. I didn't do anything this time. It was like my body had locked itself in fear. Several long moments later, that creature dropped back down onto all fours and scurried towards the beach. I don't know what the hell I saw that Wednesday night, but I moved away from the coast, bought myself a nice 1-story home in a landlocked state. And even though I'm pretty sure I got away from that thing, I never leave my door or windows unlocked. I rushed upstairs to the baby's room the moment I saw the intruder on the monitor. But it wasn't until I entered the freezing cold room with the gaping window and empty crib that I remembered the camera has a 5-second delay. A Long Way Up by Darkheroxx. I'll try not to bore you with all the details of my personal life, but there's a bit of a setup for this. I have a toxic family, hung out with shitty friends, and dated an abusive ex that led me to where I am now. Living in the middle of nowhere rural New York was just suffocating. There wasn't a single good thing about where I came from, so I pulled together what little I had and escaped that hellhole. It was tough at first, as I bounced between hotels the first few weeks I got here, but it felt like my life was changing for the better. My plans going forward are to work as much as possible, save as much money as I can, make some cool new friends, and eventually live in a nice place. I was lucky enough to land a waitress job at a nice restaurant, but it was almost across the city from where I stayed, so I had to commute on this busy subway to get to work. I'm a tiny 24-year-old woman, and honestly, it's a bit nerve-wracking to be alone all the time. I just walk a bit faster and kept my head down if anything happened. After a few weeks at work, I was finally able to find a cheap apartment a few blocks away from the restaurant. The apartment building had definitely seen some things, but anything was better than living bunk to bunk with strangers. You would think my place would be massive, with 8 floors within a weathered brick building, but when I reached my new home on 8B, I was faced with space where everything from the bedroom to the kitchen was a few steps away. As I got settled into my apartment, I was able to convince myself that it was still better than being abused every day. I sometimes worked late from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., and I'd be lying if I say I wasn't nervous going home at night. I've had a few instances where I had creeps on the street walk a bit too close to me, and a few of them even tried to follow me home. Thankfully, each time a cop or someone would be close by to intervene, but those are different stories for another time. This all happened one night after a particularly hectic shift at work. After cleaning up my section and clocking out for the night, I said goodbye to my coworkers as I went out into the cold night. My mind was completely blank and my body went to autopilot towards my apartment building. I'm not sure if it was because I was just spaced out or what, but I remember that night everything was eerily quiet. Before I knew it, I was already at the entrance of my building. The door was old and heavy, so I snapped back into reality to exert an extra bit of strength to get inside. The door groaned as I pulled it open and I squeezed my body through. I was met with warm air, my cheeks tingling as my skin adjusted to the temperature. I stepped towards the elevator and pressed the button to call it down. I waited for a few minutes, then a minute more before pressing the button a couple more times. The elevator didn't come down, and I cursed under my breath as I made my way towards the stairs. I was so exhausted, and the thought of going up all these stairs just to get to my apartment on the top floor was already torture. I was so ready to just crash on my bed. The thought alone drove me to begin my climb up the stairs. I kept my head down, and with my hand on the rail, began to go upstairs towards my room. My footsteps made an echo thud with each step I took. A few steps down, and a million to go. I made it up to the second floor on the stairway, and as soon as I crossed the threshold, I was hit with a pungent smell. It completely took me by surprise, and I was stopped in my tracks from gagging. I pressed my hand over my mouth and nose in a futile attempt to shield myself from the smell. Whatever it was, it smelled of something rotten, and it began to fill my mouth and lungs. I could almost taste the air, and my imagination made me think I was licking decayed meat. I quickly pressed onwards to escape whatever was making that smell, and as I continued up the stairs, I realized that the sound of my footsteps weren't alone. With each step I took, I could hear a faint pit-pat sound of someone else's footsteps coming from right below me. I pulled my head down over the railing, and I saw someone else slowly walking up the stairs as well. It was a woman wearing a sheer white nightgown, her thin frame almost visible through the fabric. She had her head down, raven hair flowing down with her arms laying down by her side. She was walking up the stairs with a light pit-pat from her bare feet pressing against each step. The woman looked like that girl from the grunge movies, except that she was extremely tall. I'm pretty short, just a bit taller than 5'4", but this woman had to have been at least 6 feet tall. Her body was hunched over and her hair was covering her face, and she got closer, the smell grew stronger. I've only seen a few people that lived in my apartment building, and I had never seen her before. In short, I was pretty unsettled, so I quickly made my way up towards the 3rd floor. Faint pants began to escape my lips, only a few flights of stairs, and I was already getting tired. Then I heard the light pit-pat of the woman's footsteps again, except this time they were fast. I turned around, and before I knew it, I saw her tall frame hunched over behind me. The nauseating smell forced its way down my nose and throat. I was halfway up towards the 4th floor, and she was a couple steps before the 3rd. She was just a couple feet away from me. Past my short breaths, I could hear her deep, scratching inhales with her croaking exhales. I didn't know if it was just a coincidence or not, but I quickly turned and bolted up the stairs. I shot past the 4th floor, and the noise behind me had suddenly increased in tempo. Pit-pat, pit-pat, pit-pat. I was wholly convinced now that this woman was following me. Enough was enough, so I started running up the stairs. I zoomed past the 5th floor, my heart was racing, and each breath I took was burning cold in my chest. I couldn't slow down. That woman's footsteps were loud and echoed behind me with a pit-pat, pit-pat, pit-pat. I swear her breath was right behind my head, and a warm mist hit my neck that caused a chill to run down my spine. What's worse was the damn smell grew even stronger, the odor of decay. My mind began to race. I was nearing the 6th floor, and I wasn't sure if I should start banging on doors on that floor to get help or attempt to make it to the safety of my own apartment. What if they didn't answer the door? Would I even make it to my apartment? What if she ended up catching up to me? At that final thought, I stupidly turned around, and I felt faint when I saw she was indeed just a couple steps behind me. Not only that, she was crawling up the stairs like some sort of animal, with her long, pale limbs and hair back as shadows covered her entire face. I let out a scream as I raced up the stairs even more. I hoped in my mind that someone would come out and save me, but as I made it to the 7th floor, I realized there was no savior coming to my aid. I had just one more floor left, and my apartment was the first door on the right from the stairs. I prayed to myself, begging for enough strength to somehow make it to the door before whatever that thing made its way to me. That was when I made the mistake of jinxing myself. I felt my right leg falter as soon as I made it halfway towards the 8th floor. My face began to crash towards the steps, but I was able to catch myself in time. I turned to see that the woman had caught up, and I could feel the blood draining from my face as my chest tightened at the sight of her. Her raspy breath filled my ears as she lifted one of her long, pale arms to reach towards me. She took a breath and let out a gravely sting of words. "Come with me." Her long fingers slowly wrapped around my ankle and began to pull me towards her. No, stop!" I screamed at the top of my lungs. I kicked as I turned up to grab the step ahead of me in order to pull myself away from her grip. I was in a desperate struggle to escape, and as I continued to kick at her, I heard the snapping of bones. I was expecting a rush of pain to shoot up my body until I realized the sound of breaking bones wasn't from me, but from her. The woman's grip loosened around my ankle, and I quickly crawled up the stairs without turning back. I got on my feet and ran to my apartment door, turning around to see if my attacker was behind me or not, until I suddenly slammed into something that knocked me onto my ass. From the floor, I looked up and saw a familiar face of my ex-boyfriend looking down at me. An image all too familiar that caused a plethora of flashbacks to burst in my mind. I tried to lift myself up, but before I knew it, he had already grabbed my arm and yanked me up. I saw in his eyes so much anger, something else that I was familiar with. I went to the pain from where he was squeezing me, and I begged for him to let me go. I was stuck between a rock and a hard place, stuck between two monsters. He looked at me and scoffed. His voice boomed as he spoke. "You fucking bitch, do you know how long it took me to find your pathetic ass?" I felt so small now. Everything I had worked so hard to escape was now right in front of me again. "Please, I'm sorry. Let me go, please. We have to get inside," I wailed. Like always, my words fell upon deaf ears. His gruff voice boomed again. "You and I are going back home, and you are going to stay where you fucking belong." I tugged at my arm, but I couldn't move an inch within his grip. With my free hand, I swiped it across his face. I could feel his skin tear under my fingernails. He turned his head, and I saw my scratch marks had caused thin streaks of crimson. My little victory quickly turned to pure fear as he turned back to me with a face twisted in pure anger. He lifted a fist, and I just stood, closing my eyes to await the impact until I heard him let out a gasp. His hand loosened on my arm, and I heard him shout, "What the fuck is that?" I kept my eyes closed, but I knew what he was referring to. I could hear a pit-pats of her steps, and the deep raspy breath echo through the hallway, and the air filled with the smell of rot. I curled into a ball, waiting for one of the monsters to come and finish me. Instead, I heard my ex's footsteps thud away from me, followed by fast pitter-pattering of a woman's towards him. I was on the floor next to the door of my apartment, cowering like a small child as I heard the thud of impact. I looked to see the woman, so tall and thin, hovering over my ex and beating him senseless. Blood began to splatter with each blow to his face, and then I heard a door creak open. I turned towards the direction of the sound to see an old woman peeking through the cracks. Her face was pale as a sheet and filled with fear, a fear I had grown too familiar with tonight. I couldn't speak. The words just couldn't come out, and all I could do was mouth out, "Help." I saw her take a deep breath and open the door. She had a cell phone gripped in her hand. I already called the police." Her meek voice filled the hallway. We both looked down the hall and saw my ex bloodied and beaten on the floor, with no sign of the woman in sight. The old woman and I were frozen in place for what felt like hours until the police finally showed up from the elevator. My ex was beaten to near death by a mysterious assailant. The old woman and I described the tall woman to the police, but they were in disbelief. My ex was rushed to the hospital, and that was the last night I ever talked to him. A couple days after that, I was filled with terror when I thought about going up the stairs. Luckily, the elevator worked without fail. Eventually, I went next door towards the old woman's apartment to finally thank her for helping me. When she opened the door, she looked at me with surprise, but invited me in for a cup of tea. We sat in silence for a moment until I asked her if she knew who the woman was. She stared at me for a moment with her pale blue eyes and told me a story. Once upon a time, when she was a little girl living in this building, there was a woman who lived with her husband somewhere in the apartments. She remembered that one day everyone was complaining about a smell coming from one of the rooms, and eventually the owner of the building had to open the apartment to find the tall woman beaten by her husband and her corpse left to rot. The old woman recalled being just a little girl amongst the crowd of people seeing the dead body being carried away. The smell was horrible. I finished my tea, thanked her again for her help, and went back to my apartment. When I reached my door, I stood there and just took a few minutes to take all the information in. I squeezed my eyes shut, and I heard the pitter-patters of bare feet behind me. "Thank you," I whispered to the tall woman. I know that she must have been trying to help me. From the elevator to the stairway, the tall woman was just trying to help me avoid a fate like hers. "Stop that!" I yelled, simultaneously laughing and horrified at my best friend pretending to drop a large rock over the overpass rail. Next thing I know, time is standing still and we are helpless to do anything but watch it crash through the windshield of an oncoming minivan. At the Iron Gates by BeesWithUdders. A soft pale glow slowly crept in from the darkness, rousing the unconscious man. With heavy eyelids and a tightness behind his brow, Mike gently came to. He was looking straight up, back against the cold, damp earth, eyes fixed on the unmoving, washed-out sky above. His mind reeled, veiled by a haze as thick as the fog that surrounded him. He couldn't remember where he was or how he got there. He lay motionless for some time, allowing the grogginess to pass. Small stones and wet mud made it uncomfortable, but he was soon lucid enough to move without feeling dizzy. Hands darkened by dirt brushed themselves off against filthy trousers as Mike stood up. All around him, swirling playfully, stretched a pallid fog spread out thinly across a wide dirt road. small wisp and puff of smoky gloom gathered around his ankles, dampening his socks. Winding through the patchy fog, the dirt road stretched on to eternity under the clawing embrace of looming trees. Their bark, the sickly pale gray of a corpse flecked with hints of green and blue, were vast colonies of fungal rot and ate at the trees from within. Decay wafted on a light breeze. It clung sickly and wet to the back of Mike's throat no matter how hard he tried to shift it. He yacked up a glob of phlegm and it disappeared into a mist, sending sweet, twirling ripples across its ever-shifting surface. Mike looked behind him and saw the same road twisting away into a foreboding darkness. A darkness he could not hold in his gaze for long, out of fear what lay beyond the inky shroud. The breeze suddenly picked up, scattering the mist from the path before him, bunching the rolling clouds against the thick base of the dying trees. Mike thought he caught a soft voice upon the wind. Silently, Mike waited, straining his ears to try and catch the voice again. When he heard nothing more, he convinced himself it was just the dry rustling of the damp old canopy above. But he was sorely mistaken, as when the wind picked up further, he heard a single, unmistakable word. Walk. Mike froze. The voice carried on the wind seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. How was that possible? That sort of thing doesn't happen, not in the calm and quiet English countryside. But this wasn't the countryside anymore, was it? This was somewhere uncanny and alien, somewhere Mike didn't feel he was welcome, but at the same time he felt as if this was where he was supposed to be. Where exactly was he? He would soon find out as the wind suddenly changed direction with such force that Mike stumbled forward and was set on his way down the winding path. For some time Mike walked down the path, the wet crunch of sloppy gravel his sole companion. He tried to focus on the rise and fall of the road ahead, but occasionally he would cast his gaze elsewhere. Through the thick tree line, obscured by the swirling fog, Mike could have sworn he had saw something moving. Shapes lurked and lingered just out of sight, melding with the shadows of the forest, seemingly keeping pace with him as he trudged further along into the misty eternity. Something about the musky shadows deeply unsettled him, but his attention was soon arrested, for the road came to an abrupt end. The tree line rescinded and the canopy opened, allowing the path to widen and the sky to meet the misty horizon. Bearing the path stood an immense wrought iron gate, flanked by a pair of great chipped stone brick pillars. Ancient hinges held fast to the weathered masonry by large black bolts and thick orange rust. Beyond the gate was a land engulfed in a violent torrent of swirling winds and blackening fog. Between Mike and the gate stood a hooded figure. Their tattered robes bellowed calm as they stood waiting for Mike to approach. Mike could barely see the figure's face. Their cowl was lowered so only ghostly white chin and a set of pearly white teeth were visible. Excuse me. Mike's voice caught in his throat. This was the first time he had spoken since walking. I don't suppose you can tell me where I am. A thin hiss escaped between the figure's perfect teeth, and a voice like grinding gravel rasped. You've come to the end of the road. I am the gatekeeper, and I have waited long for our meeting. The gatekeeper raised its head level with Mike's gaze. Wispy cloud eyes stared vacantly from sunken hollows. The chalky complexion was accentuated by prominent cheekbones, a tight furrowed brow, and the overall gauntness of a desiccated corpse. Mike stumbled back in surprise, tripping over his own feet and landing hard on his backside. He scrambled in the dirt and turned to run, but the road was gone, leaving the barred gate as the only way out. "Who are you?" Mike screamed, his voice deadened to nothing but a whisper by the pervading mist. "What do you want with me?" "I am here." The gatekeeper slid gracefully across the mud like it was skating on ice and held out an old, withered hand. "To help." Mike took the clawed hand, surprised not only by its fragile nature, but also by its immense strength. With no effort at all, the gatekeeper hauled Mike to his feet single-handedly. "Before you pass through the gate, first your soul is to be judged, worthy or not, of what lies beyond." Rancid breath wafted on the tail of each word, stinging Mike's eyes. "Judge my soul, so I'm dead?" Bones creaked like brittle branches in the wind as the gatekeeper gently nodded in agreement. Mike was surprised to not be stood at the pearly gates and speak to St. Peter, but he was reassured that there was at least a gate of some description. "And who judges my soul? You?" Another subtle nod. "Well, only God can judge a soul, and you don't look like a god to me. Where do I go to see him?" "There is no God here, only me. If you refuse judgment, then you're free to wander the woods with the others." The gatekeeper extended a slender arm and gestured past Mike towards the dark forest behind them. Dark silhouettes cast shadowy suggestions of bodies moving among the trees, never close enough to the road to be seen, always shrouded by the fog. Reluctantly, Mike agreed to allow his soul to be judged by the guardian of the iron gates. Folds of dry, crackled skin unfurled upon the gatekeeper's brow to reveal a third eye hidden in the center of his forehead. Glinting in the pale light, the piercing third eye bore straight through Mike's body and penetrated the depths of his soul. Before Mike could even begin to scream, his entire being was opened up to the strange entity that stood before him. Mike felt the searing cold surge through his entire body, emitting from deep within his skull. The burning chill coursed through his veins, his body cramping as they locked in place. He tried to scream, his head swimming from the pain, but Mike could not move as the gatekeeper began to molest his soul. Mike's whole life cascaded in a torrent of color and sound before his eyes. Snippets of his early childhood in the countryside, of his friends and family during the holiday or at church, of hard work and diligent study the rest of the year. Glimpses of loved ones he held dear in his heart morphed into longer scenes of those hearts he had broken. Shattered dreams and broken promises flickered by, an unending stream of disappointment and betrayal that twisted into a tight knot in the pit of Mike's stomach. Missed birthdays and canceled plans, everything Mike had neglected in favor of his own work or personal life rushed in like a tidal wave, drowning Mike in regret. The unscrupulous probing lasted only moments, but each painful second was drawn out to the length of an eternity, before collapsing in on itself, as another wave of discomfort flushed out the last. Mike felt the pressure relieve as the searching tendrils of the gatekeeper's psyche retreated from his mind. Mind, body, and soul was left undamaged by the overbearing assault, but the scars inflicted upon Mike's memory of that otherworldly presence would linger forever. He collapsed in the dirt and once again looked up at the three-eyed gatekeeper. "Judgment has passed and verdict reached." The gatekeeper paused for a moment. Mike's heart hammered in his chest as he prayed for the answer he deserved. "You are not worthy." Mike's heart sank. Fear gripped his stomach and loosened his bowels. Not worthy? How am I not worthy? I am a man of God. Mike screamed up at the gatekeeper, who remained unfazed by the sudden outburst. For a devout man of God, your selfishness knows no bounds. You are thus doomed to wander these cursed woods until the time comes when your soul is free of the burden of guilt. With a delicate flick of the wrist, the gatekeeper disappeared in a cloud of smoke. The fog slowly rolled in. The trees seemingly followed, with the canopy closing overhead. Skittering footfalls and clawing scrawling echoed in the mist as curious hands and feet drove numerous dark shapes through the fog towards Mike. Thick gray mist clawed across Mike's flailing body as he kicked and screamed at the creatures in the fog. Flowing down his throat, the fog smothered him in a cool, damp embrace as he was welcomed with open arms into the forest of the damned. When I found I was the last survivor in at least an entire city, I thought the silence was the most terrifying thing I ever heard. However, when the silence was broken by my glasses crunching underfoot, I had to reconsider my prediction. And now the stories have come to an end. If you're still awake, well, I hope you fall asleep shortly. And the sounds that you hear in the background are going to take center stage for no more than 30 minutes to help you fall asleep or stay asleep. But if you are awake and want to hear more stories, I do have playlists for that as well. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.